Joining us live is Mr. Robert John Blackman, Conservative MP in the British Parliament, popularly known as Bob Blackman. He's very vocal about his points of view, and he is here currently in Bharat. So Bob, namaste and welcome to Bharat.
Namaskar, and pleasure to be here once again.
What brings you to India this time around?
Well, I'm here visiting, obviously, leading politicians. I've been to a joyous wedding yesterday. I've got a couple of visits to temples and other meetings with various different figures from within the Indian government. And indeed, I hope to have meetings further today and also over the rest of this week.
So let's take one issue at a time. First up is this entire issue of the BBC documentary, which you have called a hatchet job.
Well, it was a hatchet job, and I'm afraid it was poor journalism, badly researched, badly sought, and cast smears against Prime Minister Nirav Modi, which are completely unjustified. It almost sought to demonstrate that the Indian judicial system could not be trusted, and I'm afraid, the judicial system in India obviously is based on the British system, completely separate from politics, completely independent. And of course, that investigated the Gujarat riots of 2002 and completely exonerated Prime Minister Modi. And indeed, in the same documentary, they had snippets of Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the time calling for calm, trying to prevent the riot, to calm the situation down. Yet the aspersions were that somehow, shape or form he was encouraging them. I mean, completely outrageous slurs against the Indian Prime Minister. And then of course it went on in the second programme to make even more slurs against the Indian government and to try and represent India as being a non-secular country. I mean, as we know, India embraces all religions, people from all backgrounds. And therefore, I'm afraid it gave a very poor picture of India and completely unjustified in my experience.
The British media has widely reported overt influence of Chinese state-sponsored elements in the BBC. And this is a two-way street, with BBC's investments in China increasing at a time when BBC journalists had to flee Beijing. Is that a cause for concern?
Well, there is a cause for concern. We've got a number of us are very concerned about Chinese influence, not just in the United Kingdom, but across the world. I take a view that China is trying to encircle India. It already has, obviously, a strong representation in Sri Lanka with the deep sea port and the international airport. It's got strong representation, obviously, in Pakistan and now in East Africa and increasingly in South America as well. So we've got to be wary of Chinese influence, and indeed the Chinese ability to suppress its minorities is an absolute disgrace. We called that out in Parliament. In fact, just this last week, when we were calling for the governor of the province where the Uyghur Muslims have been oppressed to be sanctioned by the British government, and we stand together with the Indian government to say, look, we do not want Chinese influence either in our politics or increasing Chinese influence across the world.
Do you believe there is increasing Chinese influence which is also affecting the United Kingdom, its policies and politics?
Yes, because, well, not so much the politics. I mean, we've had the circumstances of protesters of Chinese origin being dragged into the Chinese embassy and beaten up, and therefore we've called on the government, the UK government, to expel all those responsible. I mean, it's completely unacceptable behaviour for that to happen. We have a long-standing history of allowing peaceful protest, as you do in India, and that quite right too. People should be enabled to protest as long as it's peaceful and it's not threatening other people. I'm very afraid that Chinese influence has sought to come in, and we are removing Chinese products from our telecommunication systems. We're removing Chinese influence over our power stations, and we're trying to remove reliance on Chinese technology. at all aspects, because we can't trust them for what they do to our country. And I would caution, obviously, the same circumstances in India.
In fact, it's come with closed-circuit television cameras, security cameras, where the British government has taken steps to ensure that all Chinese footprint is removed. Now, is that a conscious decision? Do you support it?
Absolutely. Yes, I do. I called this out a very long time ago. My background is in telecommunications, data communications, and IT. And I was calling this out when we were considering whether we continue to use Huawei in our telecommunications infrastructure. I pointed out that there are alternative suppliers that we could use which would not place a security risk in the United Kingdom. I'm pleased to say that now strong steps are being taken to actually remove all that Chinese technology, because it can be used to spy on the UK in a serious manner. And of course, we've seen over just the past couple of weeks how spy balloons have had to be shot down by the United States and Canada, and therefore we know that's another form of basically the Chinese snooping on other countries.
But beyond security, is the UK very consciously looking beyond China to reduce its dependence on Chinese products? And is India an alternative?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, no, I think we would, frankly, I'd rather say we'd rather use Indian products than Chinese products. India is a country that we are united with, and we are obviously engaged in developing a free trade deal and have a long history together with India. But more importantly, probably we've signed the cooperation deal with India, and we're looking at, as I say, at the potential for a free trade deal. I think that's still being negotiated, and I hope we can bring that to fruition as fast as possible, and that will give India an opportunity to supply the UK with a variety of different goods and services. At the same time, give the United Kingdom the opportunity to have enhanced trade with India, which I think will be beneficial to both countries.
But if India and the UK want to work together, and you believe that both nations can help each other, then when narratives like this are pushed by the BBC and claims are made that a huge amount of taxpayers' money also goes towards funding the BBC or backing the BBC, then does the BBC represent state policy? Does the BBC represent the government's point of view? How do you sort that?
No, I think we should be abundantly clear on this. We have to be abundantly clear on this. The BBC does not represent the views of the British government, and indeed I asked specifically the Foreign Secretary, the UK Foreign Secretary, in Parliament about this, and he made clear that obviously the BBC are free to choose to publish whatever they wish and to broadcast whatever they wish, but that did not represent the views of the British government. The British government regard India as a long-standing ally and friend, and we should be treating India in such a way. And I would say to all your viewers, be very careful what is broadcast on the BBC. It is, in this particular case, as I say, it was very poorly researched. It was an innuendo behind it, and an anti-India bias, which is unacceptable, particularly from the perspective of we have a very large Indian diaspora in the United Kingdom, and all of them would be, I think, rightly enraged by the way that the BBC put this programme on. We should be clear, this programme was produced by an outside company, had an editor from the BBC engaged in obviously the programme, and then the BBC chose to show it. We've condemned it, and I think many people from the diaspora in the UK have condemned it as well. The BBC obviously operates under a charter, as you quite rightly say. Everyone has to pay their licence fee in the United Kingdom, which then funds the BBC, and I think they have a duty then, a duty of care, to make sure that if they're broadcasting programmes like this, that they make sure that it's not only accurate, but they do not literally broadcast fake news.
But there has also been allegations of Richard Sharp's association with Boris Johnson, a certain level of quid pro quo, which Boris Johnson himself has refuted these charges. But does that then, put the entire credibility of the BBC and the workings of the BBC under cloud?
I think the BBC has a long-standing history of independent journalism, and I think on this particular case, they failed in their duty to be properly independent and to have proper research. I mean, they will claim to say that they gave the Indian government the right to reply, and that Prime Minister Nirav Modi chose not to actually grant this documentary, or so-called documentary, I would call it propaganda exercise, to be anti-India. But frankly, I don't blame them for not responding, because it would have suggested that in somehow, shape or form this programme was balanced, and it wasn't balanced at all. And I think it's a great shame, because it casts doubt, and indeed, as you are saying, your viewers will be saying, my goodness me, how could the government of the United Kingdom allow this to happen? Well, it's not the government that controls the BBC, and often the BBC is very critical of the UK government as well. We understand that, and that's part and parcel of the independence of journalism. But I think it's more important that we look at responsible journalism rather than trying to control it.
There is also, I'd like to draw your attention to the recent UK report, which pointed at two factors which we also in India are dealing with: Kashmir and Khalistan, and rising Islamist forces, a lot of this being a negative Pakistani influence, rising Khalistani forces on ground in Britain, manifest in what happened recently in Leicester. Your thoughts on the report and beyond?
Well, I mean, obviously the position, as far as I'm concerned, is a long-standing view. The entirety of Jammu and Kashmir is a sovereign part of India. It's illegally occupied by Pakistan at the moment, with the longest line of control anywhere in the world. And indeed, we know that there is terrorist camps that are both set up and operating in the illegally occupied part of Kashmir that Pakistan now occupies. We know that operates. We know that causes immense security problems for India. And I think the worst aspect of this is, of course, that the Kashmir Valley is a beautiful valley. It's a centre which could be thriving for tourism, for the canned vegetables, for hydroelectric power, for handicrafts and so on. And it's a great shame that we've had the position that the security aspects almost prevents that tourism from taking place. I had the opportunity some 7 years ago to visit Srinagar at first hand and speak to people about the security position, and it's just it's a tragedy, I think, that the circumstances are such that still the terrorism is still permitted on the Pakistani occupied side of Kashmir. So clearly we need to call that out for what it is, and that is state-sponsored terrorism. And from that perspective, our sympathies are with obviously India in trying to combat that terrorism. In terms of the Khalistani issue, clearly there is a small minority of people both within the UK and within India who wish to cause, I don't know what they seek to achieve other than a so-called Khalistan state, which frankly I think would find difficulty in surviving as an entity in its own right. But in any case, that was determined some 75, 76 years ago, when India was made independent, and therefore the borders are clear between India and Pakistan. And from my perspective, I think the Khalistani terrorism that has taken place, and indeed the at times problems that we've encountered in the UK, are of serious concern. Now, you mentioned Leicester.
Yes.
And Leicester, of course, we had riots between the Hindu and Muslim communities. Principally, it was people from outside Leicester who came in and caused the trouble. We also got a lot of fake news, which it was put out there on social media to try and stir up the different communities, to cause problems between those communities. I've heard from first hand, the attacks that were made on Hindu temples and therefore the peace-loving people of Leicester, who have lived alongside Muslims for 50 years now, their lives were made a misery for a period of time, and most of those people who were involved in those riots and with the undercurrents had come in from outside Leicester to cause trouble. So clearly we've heard the reports. It's something that we cannot allow to continue, and indeed just this week, or just last week gone, in the UK we had a very detailed review of the Prevent programme, which is a programme which basically is looking at the rise of Islamist fundamentalism and the potential threats of terrorism, and clearly that is a key concern to our Home Secretary in the United Kingdom. We must not allow this to foster and grow, because that becomes a direct security threat to the United Kingdom and beyond, frankly, and so therefore we are seeking to combat that with a review of that programme that is intended to actually prevent people from being radicalised and from causing the sort of tension that arose in Leicester and could arise in other parts of the United Kingdom, where you have large groups of Hindus and Muslims living alongside each other at the moment perfectly peacefully. And in my constituency in London, in Harrow, we have people from all races, all religions, all countries, all languages, and everyone lives alongside each other peacefully. We don't have that sort of tension because we have cooperation between people, and we do not tolerate people coming in and causing trouble.
Is there an ecosystem that wants to upset the balance? Is there an ecosystem that wants to spin disinfo narratives, which then lead to these instances of social unrest?
Yes, indeed, and I think this is one of the problems. There are benefits to certain groups of people who think that by upsetting peace-loving people, then they can create an environment where riots take place, and they will seek to gain out of it. I have to say that in the United Kingdom we've had at various different times problems which have erupted in different parts of the United Kingdom. We've always dealt with it expeditiously, and we'll deal with it expeditiously again. We cannot allow those that seek to disrupt the normal UK way of life, which is peace-loving, tolerant, and encouraging people to live side by side. We can't allow people to succeed in stirring up trouble between different communities.
There's been talk of a law that would preempt such protests, nip it right in the bud. Would you support a bill like that? Because then the counter argument is you're trying to impinge on freedom of speech.
Very carefully. I'm a great believer in freedom of speech. I believe that people should be free to speak as they wish, as long as they're not promoting violence. And we have to understand that the whole principle of politics is a battle of ideas, for politicians of all types, of all persuasions, and other people to be able to put forward their ideas, to discuss those in public, and then reach conclusions. Sometimes you win the argument, sometimes you don't, but it's important to have that argument out there. And I do think at the moment there's at times there is a position of trying to suppress free speech, which I'm very much against. What we've also got to look at is where hatred is being preached and indeed encouraged to grow. We have to nip it in the bud, because if radicalisation takes place within different communities amongst impressionable young people, it's very difficult to then counter after it's taken root. So we must actually seek to eradicate that as far as possible. And I don't believe at the moment we understand in the UK how that takes place and why it takes place. I think there's an understanding amongst the intelligence community about what is going on, but I think the wider public do not understand it. They do not understand how deep-seated this is and what a problem it could be in the future.
We got some more questions, a little more ground to cover. Let me ask you: does Rishi Sunak find support within the Conservative Party?
Yeah.
What is his current status, or are there those who are trying to unsettle him? And how much of an issue are his Hindu roots and his Hindu beliefs?
Well, I think it's a matter of great pride that we in the United Kingdom have had in the Conservative Party both the first woman Prime Minister, and now of course we've had three female Prime Ministers. We've now got the first Hindu Prime Minister that we've ever had, and that demonstrates that the Conservative Party is a party where there's opportunity for everyone to become the leader or become an important position in government. That to me demonstrates that we're in good shape. Now Rishi obviously came to be Prime Minister after we'd had a bit of a hiatus, and you possibly know that I'm Secretary of the 1922 Committee, which is the backbench committee that controls the elections, and indeed I set the rules by which both Liz Truss and indeed Boris Johnson before her and also Rishi were elected. So I know these rules intimately, and indeed when Rishi was elected it was quite clear that was the view of the party in Parliament, that they wanted Rishi to be the Prime Minister. His first job was to stabilise the position, because obviously we'd had a period of hiatus with the economy on the world stage. So he successfully delivered that before Christmas. Obviously people will look to now, following the new year, we've entered the new year with a lot of public sector strikes and a lot of concern over the cost of living, and equally energy costs in particular that are driving the concerns of a lot of people, which we understand. The government's taken action to take the heat out of, literally take the heat out of those rising costs, and therefore get to a position whereby people have been given the ability to pay their energy bills. We're bearing down very hard on the cost of living, so that inflation, which has been at a high level, is starting to come down, and I think over the course of this year we'll see it more than halve, in my view, and then we'll get back to a stable position and people feel better about it. So Rishi has a very strong semblance of support within the party. He will continue to be Prime Minister right up until the general election, and we don't expect the general election to be until the late autumn next year.
So there is stability is what you're saying. So then in this period of stability, would we also see the extradition of economic offenders who have been in the UK for a while, and where the larger view is they should be extradited, but somehow the system seems to be dragging its feet on endlessly? So I'm talking about Nirav Modi, Vijay Mallya.
Well, I think that matter was raised with me last night, indeed, when I arrived, and I think obviously we've got the judicial process in the United Kingdom that has to be gone through. That's an independent process from government, quite rightly. Now, my understanding is that process has been exhausted, and that now he's claimed asylum in the UK. I shall certainly, on my return, be taking up the issue with our Home Secretary to say, well, how can someone who is accused of fraud in India and indeed other offences, how can he be claiming asylum in the United Kingdom? That seems to be a bit bizarre, to put it mildly. But obviously there's a process to be gone through. At the completion of that process, I hope that he can be extradited and face justice in India.
My final two questions, I have to wind up, but this question pertains to Pakistan. Economic penury right now for them. They are looking to the UK to bail it out. Is the UK inclined to help Pakistan right now, or would they want it to follow the IMF suggestions?
I think the reality is that the Pakistan economy is in a pretty desperate state. We in the United Kingdom have assisted with international aid where appropriate, and have a number of projects obviously going on in Pakistan. It's not for us anymore to be trying to bail out the Pakistan economy. We've got to make sure that the British economy is sound and on a strong footing. And I think there would be a big protest in the United Kingdom Parliament if it was to be suggested that in somehow, shape or form we were going to bail out Pakistan. I think it's a matter where Pakistan must take the IMF advice, and therefore, if they take the advice, I'm sure the IMF will fund them appropriately. But it's not for the United Kingdom to be doing so now.
My final question, Bob Blackman, since you're in India, how is India doing under the leadership of Prime Minister Nirav Modi, and where do you see Indo-UK equations going forward?
Well, I mean, obviously Nirav Modi has done a remarkable job as Prime Minister, uniting the country and indeed delivering for all the people of India. The fact that so much progress has been made since he became Prime Minister is remarkable. And I've had the opportunity of visiting India on a number of occasions, and you see the difference that's taking place. The Indian economy is performing admirably. I would just wish the United Kingdom economy was performing as well, but perhaps we can get that back on track. I also see a potential here. Obviously, we're negotiating a free trade agreement between the United Kingdom and India. I want to see that come to fruition, which will be hugely beneficial for the United Kingdom and for India as well. And going forward, I want us to be the best of friends, and indeed not only trade partners but defence and security partners for the region, so that we can both assist each other and indeed I've said on many occasions that India should have a permanent place on the Security Council at the United Nations as well, and I hope that we would be cooperating with India as a result, and that would help the balance, I think, of the United Nations Security Council.
There is a demand long pending, but a pleasure speaking with you, Bob Blackman. Thank you so much for your time. So that was Bob Blackman, the UK British MP, Conservative Party leader, who's in India, and he believes that India-UK equations can only become stronger, and India deserves a place at the permanent place in the UN Security Council. We're going to take a very short